I think that we've also compounded that by doing almost nothing but lying to young women, because that's all we do to young women. We tell them that, well, first of all, that career is the most important thing in life, which there is no evidence whatsoever that that's true. If you look at standard public opinion polls, you find that 75% of people regard their family and their friends as the most important part of their lives.
Men as well.
Men as well, yes. It's the social, well, Jesus, most careers aren't careers, they're jobs. How many bloody people have a career? And even if you have a career, what makes you think it's worth giving up a family for? What are you going to do when you're 50 and 60 and 70 and you're alone? And believe me, there's going to be plenty of people facing that. And, so it's no solution. And to tell young women that their fundamental orientation in life is going to be a career is a complete lie. It's not only not true conceptually, because that isn't how people are oriented, but it's untrue demographically, because what happens to the vast majority of women, even professional women, is that when they hit their 30s, their early 30s, they cut back radically on their career commitments and start to focus on having a family. And no bloody wonder, because, well, you better get at it. That's the first thing, because 30's pushing it. And second, well, what makes you think that your job is so all-consuming and meaningful? You mostly get paid to do things that you don't want to do, which is why you get paid for them. There's this tiny fraction of people who have hyper-interesting creative careers, and that they're a tremendously tiny proportion of the population. And even those people, it isn't obvious to me, have lives that are better served by their extraordinary careers than they would be served by normative family arrangements. And you need people, you need an intimate partner, you need children and grandchildren. These aren't optional. And to tell young women that that's part of the propaganda of the oppressive patriarchy is, you could hardly do them a more cruel disservice. And they will discover that when they're 30. It's why the law firms lose all their women in their 30s. They all go and take part-time jobs or work 9 to 5. They're not interested in the C-suite. Do you know how goddamn hard you have to work to be a C-suite executive? It's 80 hours a week. I know some insane men that work in the C-suite, and the mystery isn't why there are few women in the C-suite. The mystery is why there are any men at all in the C-suite, because all they do is work. And they have a tremendous amount of responsibility. And you think, well, they have many millions of dollars and they have their yachts and their freedom. And, that's trust fund people or people who are benefiting from unearned oil revenue in the Middle East, the parasitical rich, let's say, who aren't productive. But most of the people who occupy themselves in business have thousands of employees that they're responsible for, and unbelievably heavy responsibilities. And they pay a huge price for that, because all they do is work. Now, some men in particular, and some women, but a fewer proportion of women, some men are wired like that. And wherever you put them, they're going to work 80 hours a week because they're hyper-conscientious, and it's in their nature. But I wouldn't question. And so, but a lot of it's confusion, but what I also don't understand, especially from the feminists, is that if the goddamn oppressive male patriarchy is such a hellish structure bent on the oppression and domination of everyone in the world, why in the world are women encouraged to flock into it and occupy all the positions of power? That makes no sense to me at all. Is it supposed to be magically transformed in its oppressive nature merely because women happen to be doing exactly the same jobs that men were? Are the women magical in some sense and are going to decrease the degree to which the oppressiveness occurs? There's no evidence for that. That women who have male bosses are happier on average than women who have female bosses. The data, the psychological data on that are quite clear. So there's no evidence that women run more compassionate and or efficient organizations than men. And I don't know why you would expect them to, because men and women are more the same than they are different, even though the differences aren't trivial. So, and the idea that there are no differences between men and women, which is the standard social constructionist line, is only indicative of an ignorance of biology that's so profound that it should be criminal. So there's many differences between men and women, and morphologically, physiologically, psychologically, temperamentally, hormonally, developmentally, right from in utero exposure to different sex hormones. And these are not trivial matters, and they have not a determining effect, but a crucial effect. And you see these especially manifested in the extremes, which is why, for example, that the rates of incarceration of men are 10 to 15 times those of women. That's not sociological. It's because there's a small proportion of men who are hyper-aggressive, and you can identify them when they're 2. So, the social constructionists, Judith Butler and people like that, they know absolutely nothing about biology. Nothing. And their ignorance of biology is so profound that they don't even think that they need to know anything about biology, because it's not real. It's all a social construct. And it does no one any good. We know in the Scandinavian countries, here's a statistic. The freer the country, the fewer women in the STEM fields. Now explain that. It's easy. If you allow women their choice, they go into professions that care for people. If you allow men their choice, they go into professions that deal with things. And the freer the society, the more that happens. And so the Scandinavians are in this strange position where they've maximally freed their sexes by introducing socially egalitarian legislation. And one of the fundamental consequences is that the differences between men and women in Scandinavia are bigger than they are anywhere else in the world, both in terms of occupational choice and personality. And the Scandinavians have no idea what to do about that. It was a shock to everyone, including the psychologists who discovered it. But what are we going to do? We're going to force little boys and little girls to be exactly the same? We're going to set up a huge bureaucracy to start to hyper-socialize them when they're tiny, so that they become identical in every way by the time they're adults? You really think that's going to work? You have to be arrogant beyond conception and cruel to think that such a policy would be either viable or reasonably implemented. It's to their benefit. Clearly, the most detrimental predictor of poor long-term outcome for children is fatherlessness. And of course, that's something no one will talk about either, because, well, every family's the same and it doesn't matter if you have a father. Well, it turns out to bloody well matter a lot, because if you don't have a father, you're far more likely to become pregnant as a teenage girl. You hit puberty earlier. You're way more likely to be alcoholic. Your rates of mental illness go through the roof. And if you have sons, they're far more likely to be criminal, incarcerated, and drug addicted. And it's not a trivial effect. And so men are necessary in families, and the more time they spend with their children, proper time, the better. And so that's not exactly traditional. I'm not suggesting that women stay home with the babies constantly and have 10 of them while the men go off to work like they did 40 years ago, or say 60 years ago. There's more intelligent ways of organizing a family, but we should get our priorities straight. And a birth rate of 1.2 or whatever it is that we have that characterizes the Western world at the moment is not. It's the sign of a very unhealthy society. It's the sign of a society that's lost the idea of the divinity of the Virgin Mother and the child. And it's not a good thing. So, and I don't see any evidence that it's improved people's qualities of life. All of the demographic evidence suggests that women have become increasingly unhappy since the early 1960s.